Hi, do you work here?
Sure do.
Yeah, I'm just getting into reloading and I'm wondering, should I get a single stage press or should I get a progressive press?
To get started, you need to buy the most complicated and expensive piece of equipment we sell.
What the fuck? Hi, old man Taylor, coming to you from the reloading bench. And today's topic is going to be progressive reloading. Not talking so much about the brand or the, how many holes we have in there or, whatever. This is really more for the beginner reloader who's trying to decide, should I get into this with a progressive or should I get into this with a single stage press? The questions are, what is this good at? And more importantly, what is this really bad at? And the purpose of your reloading will help you decide, do I need to start with a progressive? Should I start with a single stage and grow into a progressive? Let's dig into it. So when we're talking about progressive, what are we talking about? There's a few terms I want to define here. One is single stage, and that's any one of these C style or H style presses that take one die. And the concept here is I'm going to work through every step of reloading one thing at a time. Sizing, I'm going to size first. I'm going to seat my primer. May do that on the press, may do that a different way. Then I'm going to change that die. And for handgun cartridges, I'm going to put my expander in and open that case mouth. I'm going to do that to all of my cases, and then I'm going to change that die and go on to the next until I've got a completed bullet. That's what single stage is. So there's a few terms that manufacturers have used in the past that have been a little misleading or confusing. The next would be a single stage press that I put one piece of brass in, and I have a series of dies in the top that I can rotate. That's called a turret press. That's not progressive. The concept there is I can take one case and just pull the handle, rotate, pull the handle, rotate, right? Or I can run all of my dies or my cases through and then rotate, and that way I don't have to keep changing my setup. But that's not progressive. When we're talking about progressive, we're talking about auto indexing. That means it's rotating the shell plate. For example, in this case, I'm going to set an empty case here, and I'm going to pull the handle. And when I complete pulling the handle, that case is going to be in the next station. It's automatically going to go to the next place. So, and I've got the top of a progressive press here. This is actually RCBS's piggyback system that mounts on this rock chucker, so I can have both. But these are really similar, and if we look at that, what we can see is there's really 5 dies that I can add and rotate the case from 1 to number 5, which means I've got a lot of freedom here. I can actually put whatever dies I want in those 5 holes. Typically on a progressive press, whatever brand, are going to work that way. I can change the order. I can put different dies in. I can do things in 2 stages if I need more holes than I actually have. But usually priming is built in, and in this case that is true. I've got a primer built in. I've got a primer system built in. So I can't move that stage, and in this case, it's stage number 2, and that's actually pretty common because I'm going to decap on my first stage, so I'll prime on my second. All right. So other than things like that are fixed, most press systems, that's it. That's the one thing that I can't rotate. Everything else I can. So now I'm limited by the number of holes that I have. And both of these presses are 5 die. Most are at 5. Some go up all the way to 10. There's one fairly common blue one that is 4, and there are a few others that are 4 as well. May be okay, depending on what you're trying to do. That may be okay, but it can also be limiting. But if you decide to run all of your cases through 2 times, you can get 8, right? Maybe that's actually what you want to do if you get a little more complicated reloading methods. What am I talking about? Well, if I'm just getting started, I'm probably going to have 3 dies for handguns, for 45 that I'm loading here. The first one is going to be my decap sizing. My second is going to be the one that just opens the mouth up just enough so I can put a bullet in it. My third station is going to be where I drop my gunpowder. My fourth station is where I'm going to seat or crimp or both. And if I'm doing both, I only need 4. There it is. And a completed bullet comes out. In this case, I'm running a powder checker because I want to be sure that my gunpowder is the right charge and I'm not loading a squib or a double load. I'm going to do that. I can use a die because I am seating and crimping on one station with this setup. So that leaves an empty space that I can put that in there. On my 45 setup, I've chosen to split those two things up. So I've got a seating die and I have a Lee factory crimp die. Like them or not, they work very well on 45. So I am running that. And because of that, I've used up all my stations, but I also want a bullet feeder. I want something that'll drop the bullets for me so I don't have to set them every time. So what I've done there is I've changed my powder die into an expander and a powder. It does both at the same time. So technically I only have 5 holes. I'm using 6. So I can get creative that way, right? But if I didn't want to do that, another method to get these 6 would be to split them up into 2 runs. The first run being decap and sizing. My second, I'm going to seat my primer. I'll go ahead and bell that mouth. And then I'll take those dies out and then set up my bullet feeder, my seating die, and my factory crimp die, those 3, and run those same cases through again. Now I'm going to have 6. Everything's going to be separate, and I could put my powder checker in there, my powder lockout die. Now I've got 7, right? So that's also a viable way to do it. Those are definitely ways that are done. For handguns in particular, that's what the progressive system is really good at. It's really good at handgun, and one of the reasons it's good at that is because they're straight wall cases. So most rifle cartridges are not. They're bottleneck, right? We do have some carbine, or we got 30-30, stuff like that. Actually run about the same because I don't have a sizing problem with straight wall cases. So progressives work very, very well on straight wall. The other challenge that I can have, my gunpowder charge. I'm throwing every single charge. My gunpowder thrower, this particular one, pretty dang good. It's pretty accurate. Is it accurate enough for really precise rounds? Not really. For rifle rounds is what I'm talking about. If I'm shooting 600,000 yards, not going to work. The deviation will just be a little bit too much for that. So in that scenario, I've got a trickle charge. There's no way around it. I've got to trickle charge this manually onto my scale, or I've got to use an electronic trickle charger that has a scale built into it, and it's going to very, very finely down to really the flake or the grain give me a very accurate charge. This is not going to do that. So if I'm loading that type of a rifle round, handgun rounds don't need to be that precise. If I'm loading that extremely precise rifle round, my progressive rig is not going to work as far as throwing the gunpowder. Now, can I use it for some of that? Absolutely. Let's look at my 308 for a minute. So my really precise 308 rounds, I've got to break the sizing die into 3 different parts. I'm going to decap with one. I'm going to full size resize and bump my shoulder back, but I'm going to take the expander and the decapper out. I'm going to do that because I don't want to overstretch my metal and open that up less precisely than a mandrel will. So my third step in sizing is going to be using a mandrel to set case tension and making sure that I'm concentric. Okay, so now I've got 3 steps instead of one. I can do all 3 here. I got to change the die 3 times, run the same piece of brass through 3 times. Or I can set up those 3 dies in my progressive rig, take my 308 and run it through all 3. And I can seat a primer. So really accomplish 4 tasks there as long as I don't need to trim after I size. So typically if I'm going to do that, I'm going to go ahead and pre-trim and maybe bring them down a little bit slightly, thousandths or so smaller than I want. So when I do my sizing and it grows just a little bit, they'll be right where I want them to be. That is one scenario where I'm going to want a progressive rig large enough to take a 308 case. And this RCBS piggyback can't. The 308 is too tall for it. The Ammo Master can take a 308. So when I'm looking at progressives, I've really got to think about what I'm trying to do when I'm trying to decide, is this even going to work, right? If I'm going to use rifle, I've got to lube them before they go into the press, and of course they'll come out completed. So I'll have to clean the lube off a completed round. Not a big deal, but I've got to be aware of that, right? If that's the route I'm going to go. 223. I load 223 on both presses for my M4 because that type of 1/10 grain accuracy is fine. And most of my M4s are not precision weapons. They're 1.5 inch, 2 inch groups at 100 yards. 1/10 of a grain, not going to matter. Probably not running very high dollar projectiles either, right? But that 308 that I'm going to take very long range, or my bolt action 223 that I'm also going to take to extreme, to its limits as far as distance goes in accuracy, not going to load on a progressive rig. I'm going to be single staging that. So when I'm trying to decide between progressive and single stage, end use dictates whether I can even do it on a progressive. Well, then there's a few other caveats. There are some things that a progressive press cannot do. I already talked about one, trickle charging, right? If I need a really extreme charge, progressive's not going to work for me. I'm going to have to stop before gunpowder, pull the case, charge it with gunpowder, and then I could put it back in and seat and then crimp. That's a possibility. It's one way to do it. But there are a few jobs like this one that I just can't do on a progressive rig. This particular setup, I'm taking out military crimps. So if I needed to set up this die, it uses a special base to free the ram from the primer pocket, basically shaping the primer pocket by removing the military crimp. I cannot do that. So if I needed to do that, I would have to have both presses. And that's one of the reasons, of course, I started with a piggyback. So I could take the piggyback off and do single stage things. Here's another one, bullet size. The bullet sizer takes the ram down here instead of the case. Well, on my shell plate, I have no way to use a ram. So if I'm doing bolt sizing and things like that, got to be done on a single stage. So if there's any job or application that requires single stage, I'm going to have both. I'm going to have a progressive and a single stage, or I'm going to have the ability to switch between the two, which piggybacks have not been made in many years. So good luck with that. So those are really the main applications that help determine whether or not progressives for me or not. But let's talk about ability, okay? So if I'm a new hand loader and I'm learning how to hand load, I'm gonna struggle a little bit with each one of these stages, figuring it out, getting it set up just right, then running all of my cases and then learning the next one, right? I'm gonna have all of them happening at the same time over here. I might not even know what they feel like. This is all by feel. There's a reason there's not an electric motor on this press running it, right? It cannot work that way. When I'm moving this handle, I am feeling everything. I'm feeling that primer going into the pocket on the down, when I'm when the cases are at the bottom and I'm pressing that in, I can feel that very, very well. And if there's a problem, I'm going to stop and pull that case, right? Also, same thing with sizing. If I'm going up on the sizing and I've got a a European style primer that doesn't have a hole in the center, I'm going to feel that. I'm going to stop before I break that pin out. I may have a problem with a case that's so damaged that I can't get it into the sizing press. And I'm going to stop and I'm going to pull that case and is it too dented? Let's pitch it. Whatever. I'm going to feel things and I'm going to notice things because I'm very intimately familiar with every stage of loading. So when one of them goes wrong, I know what it feels like, and I know how to troubleshoot it when it stops rotating. I know all the reasons that would lock it up, so I can go find them and solve the problem and move forward. If I'm fairly green at this, all that's happening, I'm going to have a lot of frustration. This is not going to be set up perfectly. I've got to set it up perfectly. I got to have some mechanical aptitude to dial this thing in and get it running correctly for each caliber, for each time I change it over. And if there's anything that goes wrong, I need to be familiar enough with everything that's happening all at the same time to be able to stop and figure it out. So what I would strongly recommend anyone considering getting into reloading and they're looking at single stage versus progressive and they're trying to decide which, I would strongly recommend you start with single stage. Single stage presses can do everything a progressive press can do. All right, but not the other way around, and it gives me a chance to learn each stage very, very well. So I'm going to use the single stage. I find it's very convenient if I have a primer that just doesn't go in well when I'm inspecting my cases. I've got everything set up and it just doesn't look right. If I've got a single stage sitting here with a universal decapper in there, I can just pop that bad primer right out of there, set it right back into my progressive and go. You'll use the single stage even if you have the progressive. You will find there are times when you like to have it. So I would strongly recommend you just start with that. Start with the single stage, learn the whole thing. Once you get it down, pretty comfortable, know what you're doing, you're making handgun rounds or you're making straight wall, 30-30, something like that, you're probably then going to be okay to go on up to your progressive and start digging into it. So that's my recommendation. This is Old Man Taylor. I do have an entire series on RCBS's Piggyback. I'll be creating one for the Ammo Master and a bunch of other hand loading videos. If you would, check out that playlist right there. If you've got some differing opinions or something else to add to what I've said, please drop that in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and thank you.